Jamie, of course, for 2 years was necrary to the Queen Mother and then came back to become private secretary to Prince William and Prince Harry. What was that job like?
You know, I really loved them. And I always said I was the only private secretary who needed to be able to ride a trial bike to keep up with them on their motorbikes.
In Spare, Harry was pretty scathing about most of the courtiers, but he really singled you out for what is really a love letter. What did it mean for you to read that from him and realize he did value what you did for him when he was a young man?
You know, circumstances have come along which are very sad, but I'm fond of them both. Yes, sure, it was nice to read that in his book.
From everything you've seen across the last 40 years, is the monarchy going to be all right?
The monarchy, throughout its 1,200-year history, has always been on the edge of crisis.
Yes, hello, it is Tom Sykes here. I've got to admit, I've got shell shock or PTSD, I don't know what you call it, after the maddest week of royal news I can ever remember. I've been all over it on lives every single day. We've had incredible interviews with Marcus Johnston talking to us about the legal implications, the cost implications of what's going on with Harry and his legal case. We've been covering the Invictus Games event in Birmingham. I went there in person. And of course, Harry's meeting with his father on Friday that saved everything for him from what was looking like a disastrous week to become one of the best weeks ever. Now, I know how you lot all feel because, as you know, I pay attention to the comments. I'm in the comments and I'll be joining you this evening. But what I've decided to do with the podcast this week, rather than go back over all that Harry stuff that, you know, frankly, a lot of you have been following so much on the lives all week, I thought we'd change the tone a little tiny bit. And we have got somebody I am so excited to bring to you. I mean, the term Royal Insider doesn't really even begin to cover it, but it's really going to be an absolute belter of a podcast. So I urge you, get yourself a cup of tea, get yourself a chocolate biscuit, sit down and enjoy, because this is one of the absolute classics. Please like, please subscribe, please leave a comment. It all helps. And if you're feeling really kind, why not become a member of the Royalist channel? Okay, without further ado, my friends, let's get into our royal news update. The Wales family were putting on a very good show all last week, whether they were at the polo or they were at Wimbledon. They were out there effortlessly showing that they could mix a bit of royal glamour with a bit of family day out, with a bit of good, honest duty, without sort of, creating too much drama in contrast to some other members of the royal family, shall we say. So Catherine and William arrived at Wimbledon to watch Italy's Yannick Sinner face Germany's Alexander Zverev in the men's singles final, as they always do. Catherine is the patron of Wimbledon. She loves tennis, big fan of tennis. And they were with just their two eldest children, George, 12, and Charlotte, 11. Louis, 8. Sadly, we were going to be getting no funny faces from Louis this year. Although a ball girl did say that William and Catherine told her that Louis wanted to be a ball boy at Wimbledon. I'm not sure that is going to be possible, Louis. Sorry. So he may have missed out this time round, but actually George didn't start going till he was 9, so maybe he'll come next year. They all showed up in their very smart suits and ties, despite the absolutely boiling heat, as they always do. And I have to say, I take my hat off to those kids. They really do behave themselves, sitting there in the royal box when they'd probably much rather be splashing around in a sprinkler in the garden like every other child their age, because we've got a bit of a heat wave going on this side of the pond at the moment. Catherine looked fantastic, an Amelia Wickstead dress. Charlotte wore a kind of cute blue sundress, and they did look they looked fantastic. Of course, they got their standing ovation as they took their seats in the royal box. Very poignant moment, really. I think echoing Wimbledon 2024, when Catherine was having cancer treatment and made this appearance at Wimbledon. You may remember it was a surprise, and Now, it wasn't the first time she'd been at Wimbledon. This year, she'd turned up earlier in the tournament. It lasts 2 weeks, the Wimbledon tournament, and she turned up earlier and actually sold some people some tickets in a kind of very, classic royal photo op. Plenty of other celebrities there. Wimbledon does always get them, don't they? Anna Wintour, Nicole Kidman, Jennifer Lopez, Tom Hiddleston, Dustin Hoffman. Good to see Dustin Hoffman. Ben Stiller, many, many more. I'm sure you can pick out much more than I can. But Catherine, of course, as the patron, presents the trophy to Sinner, hailed his fantastic achievement. He then offered to hit a few balls with Prince George, which was very nice, wasn't it, one day? So it was, look, it was a really, the Wimbledon thing is one of those events in the calendar that is so important to the royal family. Partly, it helps, right, that Catherine loves tennis, but it's also just one of those things that it just can't go wrong. Like, there's no way it can go wrong. They just show up, they watch the tennis, and they hand over the cup or the plate, So it was absolutely brilliant. And now it's time for a spot of tea with Tom. My old chum, Paula Froelich. Let's start with some fashion.
Yeah. All right. So, what was fascinating is that Harry and Meghan were both, quote, in Europe for about a week or two before they went to London. Now, some people were saying they were in Portugal. Either way, it was during Paris Couture Week. And while Naomi Watts was on the front row of Balenciaga, you know who wasn't?
I'm going to have a guess that you're going to say somebody's name that alliterates with the letter M.
Yeah, that's right. She wasn't there because she really kind of screwed the pooch last time. So last fall, we all remember she decided she was going to go back to her roots of fashion. And she really wanted to be like the couture kind of lady. And she showed up to Pier Paolo Piccioli's first debut Balenciaga show and sucked all the oxygen out of the room. She walked in, she came in, she gave interviews saying, yes, we've collaborated. And then royally pissed off Anna Wintour by being late, making everyone kind of wait, posing like a queen for photographers, and then giggling as a model tripped on the runway. Afterwards, she didn't even bother going to the after party. She got in a car with friends, put their feet up on the bench in the car, and took a photo as they passed by the tunnel that Diana was killed in, with champagne, of course. So afterwards, a lot of people were really mad about it because they were saying Pier Paolo is probably one of the nicest guys in fashion, and he has worked his little buns off to get where he is. Balenciaga is a big deal. And, why would she say collaboration? It's not like she's Beyonce, who has actually collaborated with Demna from Gucci on outfits for her Renaissance tour. And no, she basically had been text friends with Pier Paolo. Later at the after party, Pier Paolo told the cut, oh, yes, she said she wanted to come. And I said, okay. She basically invited herself. And they paid for it for PR. Yes, it was 250,000. That's a rounding error for the big shows like that. He was like, fine, it'll get attention. Unfortunately, it's the wrong sort of attention. Nobody paid attention to his clothes. So this time during Paris Couture Week, she was not there. She was not invited. I'm sure texts went unanswered and everyone looked at the clothes and it was a rounding success for him. Rousing. Huge success for Pier Paolo.
I think what's really interesting about Meghan and fashion is that she never looks worse than when in some high fashion gear. And for my money, she looks kind of amazing when she's in jeans and a white shirt and a pair of sneakers. Do you know what I mean? Like when that in a way, like her own natural look of like jeans and a shirt. She looks fantastic, very sort of all-American, almost Ralph Lauren-y. But it's weird. Like the moment she just reminds me of somebody who's just suddenly been handed the keys to like really expensive designer gear, but the clothes wear her rather than her wearing the clothes or something. I don't know. Like the hemlines always seem to be wrong. And even in that big white thing that she wore to the Balenciaga show, I mean, it looked like she was being sort of swaddled in a
Swallowed.
big ball of cotton wool, didn't it? I mean, it was just so weird.
Yeah, no, she feels like she's pretending to be something, like she's in the role of like fashion person instead of just kind of being herself. Although at this point, who is Meghan?
I'm biased because I've been writing a book about it, but I think that she's trying to emulate Wallace. So because Wallace Simpson genuinely was like, I mean, she was foundational sort of building block of what we call chic today, and genuinely did collaborate with those designers like Manbochet and Schiaparelli and the lobster dress and all that kind of stuff.
The
And
lobster dress?
yeah,
Sorry.
the lobster dress, yeah, yeah. And I definitely feel like that's what Meghan thought she was doing with that statement from the Balenciaga show. And it was just so cutting the way he then dismissed it with like, yeah, she sent me a text. I said she could come.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I see it differently because her god in her mind is Beyonce, and Beyonce had just come out with the collaboration and collaborative with Demna, and she was like, "Wait, I know." But, you're right with whenever she tries to get into high fashion, it looks weird, like that cover of Harper's Bazaar was just awful, plain and simple.
And speaking of Harry, a slight froideur descending.
Nah, yeah. Even if they had won one of their complaints against the Daily Mail, Harry would have crowed about it and said he was the victor and very excited. However, then it got even worse after they did lose all 97 complaints because Harry then put out that horrible nonsense statement in which he not only attacked Judge Nicklin, he basically attacked the court system, which his father is the head of, figurehead at least. And Judge Nicklin still has to decide on damages.
Yes, so I'm not sure if any of you guys, well, I'm sure lots of you watched my interview with Marcus Johnson. I did 2 interviews with Marcus Johnson, who did a brilliant explanation of just why that statement was so incredibly stupid that Harry made. Because before the trial, the judge said, "Okay, both of you, all your numbers are ridiculous. This is going to be 4 million each is the most that you're going to be allowed to claim from each other." But and that's called authorized ATE. I can't remember what it exactly stands for, but that's the kind of authorized expenses that they were allowed to claim. But the Mail are now saying that they're going to go for the jugular and they're going to try and get that overturned. And instead of just having to pay the authorized costs, they're going to say, but this whole case was nonsense, and because, as you say, Paula, they didn't even win one count. Marcus Johnson was telling me that he thinks it's very likely that they could get what's called, I think it's called indemnified expenses on the costs. So this is all going to be about the costs. And as you point out, it is Justice Nicklin himself who is going to rule on this matter. And while I'm sure he's a terribly professional man who won't allow such things to cloud his judgment, it seems an unnecessary bit of rattling of the cage to say that the guy's corrupt before he's given that statement, right?
Yeah, well, and also the other thing is, even if Judge Nicklin doesn't allow indemnity, the Times of London had a very good article this week. Actually, they had 2. The first one said that the insurers may already have dropped out and sent notice saying, "We're not insuring you," because this case was ridiculous. They were likely in court every day. And then once if they determined that Harry perhaps was not truthful on the stand, they could absolutely say, "We're not covering this insurance claim." Also, the statement doesn't help with insurers. And it's just, it's a lot.
And then I think what you were going to mention, Paul, was that second piece where they go around, they interviewed Burroughs, they interviewed Gavin Burroughs, they interviewed Jonathan Rees, they interviewed all these dodgy blokes. And, literally they're saying, oh, I wasn't going to commit perjury and risk 8 years in jail and stuff. I mean, it was an extraordinary piece, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, and then, of course, there was also the op-ed that the Times of London did, which is the paper of record in England, saying that Harry should no longer be a counselor of state and damning him for everything, for the statement, for the lawsuit in general, for his actions in the past. And it's a lot. Harry's in a lot of trouble, even though he's excited because he got to meet Pa this week with the kids. But this is going to have massive repercussions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really interesting situation, isn't it? Because in some senses, like, normal people would never have cared about a privacy case for about, who got an ex-directory phone number 25 years ago. So, but of course, they are the ones who made a massive deal out of it. And now they're kind of trying to say, well, actually, it's just a nothing burger. And it's like, okay, guys, yeah, it's called having your cake and eating it. But I do think that ultimately, getting that meeting with Charles, if you think about not people like us or people who watch this podcast who follow the story closely, but people who are just picking it up on their Facebook feeds or whatever. I mean, it was a massive Hail Mary gift from Charles, wasn't it? I mean, it rescued his year, really.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if the king meets up with Harry in September and again next year. But I also think maybe it wasn't so great for Harry. The king wanted to see the children. So, of course, Meghan and the children, as you and I have both been saying, had to come because otherwise he wouldn't have gotten that meeting, especially not after attacking the courts. And we don't know what was said, but of course, people in Britain are really, really furious because the king is head of the courts, figurehead, and his son just called the courts corrupt. So it was a weird move for Charles. I understand as a grandfather, he wanted to see his grandchildren, but I'm not sure it was the happy, haha, huggy meeting that Harry might make it out to seem.
I just thought it was an extraordinary thing for the king to do. And I thought it was an extraordinary way to spend, frankly, he doesn't have a huge amount of political capital. I mean, you won't know this. If you read the British legacy newspapers, right, all you'll ever read is everything's going brilliantly, everything's amazing, everything's marvelous. But, the reality is that the king doesn't have a huge amount of political capital to spend. And it seems to me a bit of a risk.
No, but also the other point is, Tom, that the support for the monarchy is, and for King Charles in particular, is often with the older generation. The older generation also have grandkids of their own, and a lot of people have faced alienation from their grandchildren. So I think a lot of people's hearts in that generation are with King Charles to see his grandchildren.
Yes, absolutely. Paula, thank you so much. Now, so that I don't get it wrong, will you list your incredibly lengthy string of media accolades, your TV shows, your Substack columns, your YouTube column? But now tell everybody where they can get more Paula Froelich in their lives, which, let's face it, everybody needs.
Oh, I just adore you, Tom. Well, every Tuesday and Thursday, my News Nation YouTube show comes out. That's called The Scoop. And then every week, I have written exclusives on my Substack, Paula Froelich Uncensored. And of course, there's always my YouTube, which Tom is on quite a bit. It's at Paula Froelich, Froelich BT-dub.
Which is the German for happy. Thank you so much, Paula. You've made us all happy as always. Paula, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And finally, folks, the moment you've all been waiting for, our Royal Insider. Well, do you know, we've had some brilliant guests on The Royalist in the couple of months since we started operations. We're actually approaching our first birthday on August the 4th. But I have rarely been as excited to have a guest on as I am to have Jamie Lowther-Pinkerton on. Jamie, known as JLP in royal circles, and I think in Harry's book Spare, I think is called JLP quite a bit, has lived a life that reads like fiction. He was an SAS officer. He's an MBE. He was an equerry and I believe chief martini mixer to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. So we're going to get into that. Then for the best part of a decade, he was the private secretary to Princes William and Prince Harry. And actually, I remember dealing with Jamie years ago when Harry was going on a trip to Jamaica and Jamie was organising it all. So this is a man that I've dealt with over the years. I can't even tell you about Jamie's reputation. I mean, he has such an amazing reputation. Any military person that you talk about will just tell you basically that he's a legend. He's also the soul of discretion. And Prince Harry himself, a man we might say not famous for kind words about courtiers, wrote in Spare that JLP was a force who didn't deal in nonsense, he didn't give it, he didn't take it. Well, Jamie has now done the last thing anyone expected and written a novel. And it's rather a brilliant novel. It's called Beyond the Edge of Light. It's a wartime love story set in a part of England that I really love, the Sussex coast. And it's published this week and inspired by his mother. So he's going to tell us all about the book. And then he's hopefully going to tell us quite a bit about the Queen Mother and riding quad bikes after Prince William and Prince Harry. Jamie, welcome to the Royalist.
Thank you very much, Tom. What a glorious introduction. I don't think my head is about to explode. Very far from the truth, but very nice. Thank you.
Now, the algorithm of the internet dictates that we talk about your book first before we get on to the royal family, because we want people to know about this book. And actually, I've been writing a book myself, and I only recently finished the manuscript. And your book was the first book that I picked up afterwards, because as you know, when you're writing a book, you're not allowed to read any other books because you're so busy working on your own book. And it's I mean, I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I was absolutely compelled by it when I picked it up. I mean, I'm going to try and summarize it. It's an English girl working in intelligence, a German aristocrat flying for a Luftwaffe that he despises. I think a good German is the phrase that you've used. A love story, star-crossed lovers torn apart by the Second World War. For people who haven't picked it up yet, tell us, who are these two central characters, Missy and Conrad?
Well, Tom, I mean, it's a very good little snapshot you've given. Missy Ormsby is based on my mother's life, actually, but she was essentially a child of the frontier, of the northwest frontier of India, wild as anything in her youth, as was my mother. And she comes back to school at a punishing young age of 12, which is what happened in those days without your parents. And she rebelled, and she was sent off as a punishment posting in a way to a finishing school in Switzerland, where she met Konrad von Ecklau, who is part of the East Prussian, a down-at-heel member of the East Prussian military aristocracy, who is virulently anti-Nazi, but finds himself, as many, as you put it, good Germans did in those days, where the conflict exists between duty and country and effectively a loathing of Nazism, but they get sucked into the system, basically, which is one of the sort of key themes of the book, which is when the person you love becomes your enemy, and how far can you go as a nation which is fighting, frankly, for its survival over those red lines. And that's the sort of the tenet of the book.
And Missy, the female lead, I suppose we might call her, you've said is inspired by your mother, who only died a couple of years ago, at the ripe old age of 99, and who you've called your best mate. I understand that she had an incredibly, amazingly glamorous array of jobs as a motorcycle dispatch rider, military intelligence in Singapore, all these kinds of things. But you actually didn't know anything about it until much later on in her life. You didn't grow up with these stories.
No, I mean she was a very interesting person. I mean, she died in her 100th year 2 years ago, as you say. And for the sort of second half of that, she was sort of Miss Marple in the shires of England, sort of knitting cardigans for godchildren and being everybody's mother, not just mine. And everybody loved her. But for the first half of her life, she lived this life of real adventure. I've already talked about her childhood in India. But during the war, I mean, she was chucked out of every educational establishment she went to when she came back to England because of the freedom she had known in India. And she ended up sort of biding her time, but then joined the ATS, which was the same female. It was essentially the women's army. It was the same organization that the Queen joined during the war as a young woman. And in that, she rode a motorcycle. She was a motorcycle dispatch rider, and she had to sort of, when she delivered her message, the motorbike was so heavy that she had to wait for a passing paratrooper to pick it up and send her on her way again. But she then, after the war, joined military intelligence in the Far East, which is where my grandfather was posted. He was a general in the Indian Army, the British Indian Army. And then when she came home, she joined MI5 from that. And we only discovered this when I was in my late 20s. And we were watching a documentary at home over Christmas about who was the fifth man, who was the last member of this Cambridge spy ring who hadn't been identified. And my father wanted to watch this. And the documentary maker said, well, we think it could be Sir Roger Hollis, the Director General of MI5. At which my mother, without missing a stitch in her knitting, said, that's absolute nonsense. He was a total gentleman and patriot. My sister and I both looked at us sideways thinking, what on earth are you talking about? What do you know about this? And we tried sort of plugging her on that, but my father burst into hysterics. But I actually asked if I could tape her, because I did tape her about her life in the Northwest frontier. And she did that classic thing of her generation by being charming and saying, darling, I'd love to do this. Can I sleep on it? And we just knew that when she woke up in the morning, she would come and say, no, I'm sorry, I can't, because I signed the Official Secrets Act. But she was wonderful like that. And she was very, very beautiful, and she had all these amazing sort of proposals of marriage, about 11 of them, I think. I mean, I think during the war, you met somebody and they wanted to get married to you because it was that time of life for so many unfortunate people. But she had a lot of character, a lot of beauty about her, actually.
I love the setting of the Suffolk coast, and it's a part of England that I really love. My apologies, I may have said Sussex in the intro. I meant to say Suffolk. And of course, the Suffolk's coast. I mean, people know it all round. I mean, I think it's like sort of Walberswick and Dunwich and those kinds of places, isn't it? And then you set part of this on this legend of these German soldiers who reputedly landed on the Suffolk coast. What is the legend, and how much of it do you believe? And have I got my geography correct?
Yeah, pretty good, Tom. Actually, I mean, it's a little bit south of there. You probably know the Anglo-Saxon burial ship at Sutton Hoo. It's that sort of part of the world. It's very remote. It's on a peninsula which sticks out into the North Sea. And on the seaward side, anyway, it's mainly marshland and very sort of wild, large skies. And the legend of Shingle Street, which is a tiny hamlet which sort of sits right on the shingle, sort of on the far side of the marsh, wedged between the marsh and the sea, dates back to the summer of 1940. And the legend is that German soldiers landed there on a raid, probably targeted at Bawdsey Manor, which is where my wife's family lived before the war, which just before the war was bought and converted into the research and development station for radar, which obviously was the thing which was causing mayhem with the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain, and really was saving our bacon, along with very brave pilots and Spitfires, etc. But radar was underpinning it all. And they were quite a long way behind us, and they didn't really know what the capabilities of this was. So my feeling about it is, and I don't know whether this happened, and in some ways legends shouldn't be answered. They should remain legends, particularly 100 years on. I don't suppose anybody knows about it. But my feeling is that there's a very credible reason for it, which would have been for them to have snatched a piece of equipment and some technicians and then worked out countermeasures as to how they could get round it. And actually, for me as a novelist, it's a convenient way of bringing my two lovers back into the same orbit, which is why I pounced upon it. But it's an intriguing story, and it persists, and long may it persist unanswered.
And it is a great story, actually. And I actually know a bit about it because I worked with a quite a legendary lightning pilots instructor who's a guy called David Hemmings, is a guy called David Hemmings. Hello, David. And his father, I think, helped develop the first radar chains. And it's a kind of extraordinary story at Bordsey. And it's a kind of amazing story because the Germans actually didn't have radar and didn't actually know that we had radar. I mean, it was an incredible kind of technological hold that we had over the Germans, wasn't it, in the Second World War?
Well, that's very interesting about your friend. I mean, it's an interesting one because they did have a sort of nascent radar capability, which was called Freya, but they were 2 or 3 years behind us. And we know that they knew about Bordsey because before the war, the Graf Zeppelin, which was en route, a huge airship, which was en route from New York back to Hamburg, it basically loitered off the Suffolk coast, taking pictures of the radar station at Bordsey a couple of years before the war. And it's quite a famous photograph, actually, of this huge airship lying off Bordsey and taking photographs before resuming its flight to Hamburg. So they knew pretty well, and certainly the pilots, the Luftwaffe pilots, within 2 or 3 months realized what this string of early warning stations was doing to their campaign. So I think it's a credible option for me to have picked. But as I say, I don't really want it. I'm not giving any answers, and I don't really want the legend to disappear. It's a good legend to have.
Well, from one legend to another, your first experience of the royal household, as I understand it, was working for the great legend, the Queen Mother. She's a woman who it's easy to caricature. I mean, there's actually a great deal of writing and scholarship about her if you want to know the truth about her. I mean, there is a tremendous about her, but I mean, she was I felt kind of very misrepresented. You know, she can be very misrepresented in The Crown and in, kind of almost comic retellings and caricatures. But you worked for her very closely for 2 years. I'd love to hear, it's a terrible question, but what was she really like?
Well, I mean, she was extraordinary, and I know that's a very sort of vanilla thing to say. I mean, she was a very strong, very, very strong woman. I think her contribution to keeping morale up and us engaged as a nation in the fight during the Second World War posterity will judge her very, very favorably on that. I mean, it's well documented the support she gave to her husband, King George VI. But I think it was more than that. It was this sort of Scottish steel that ran down her spine. She'd lived it. I mean, in the First World War, her favorite brother was killed in the Black Watch. She herself nursed wounded soldiers because Glamis Castle became a military hospital during the First World War. So she saw it up close. It was a privileged background she came from, but that was pretty worldly stuff going on in your teens for her. So she had this experience, and it shone through. I mean, she was huge fun. That's what I would say. She was like working for her as a young officer. I was only about 22 or 23 at the time. Because of the sort of disparate nature of the royal family, I mean, necessary that it's a pretty separated out family because of its duties, etc. She really adopted you as the equerry. She adopted you as a sort of surrogate grandson, and you did pretty much everything you wanted to do with her. And you had to book out for lunch. I mean, otherwise, if you didn't have anywhere to go to lunch, you had lunch with her and her equally amazing ladies in waiting. I mean, they were an incredible lot, her household. I mean, the private secretary, the equivalent of which I was a very pale comparison later on with the princes. had been, I think he'd been the adjutant of Colditz. He was a great man, and that was reflected all the way through the ranks of those who served her, and indeed amongst her friends. I mean, I spent, gosh, you spent 3 months of your life in Scotland living with her during those 2 years each year, and I was the youngest by about 60 years, I suppose. But actually, her friends were people like Sir Frederick Ashton, the great choreographer, and Battle of Britain fighter pilots, and they were all totally young at heart. So actually, you didn't feel that out of place, even though you were 60 years younger. You could have fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I leave it to the terrible Adolf Hitler to give the final verdict, and he called her the most dangerous woman in Europe, and that's the biggest accolade you can get, isn't it, actually? So he was that worried about her. And as you say, the Crown's portrayal of her, I mean, I enjoyed The Crown as a program to watch, but that was a really bad error. I mean, because they made her out to be just somebody she wasn't. I mean, she was formidable.
Yeah, I mean, she certainly was. I mean, she held the country together, the abdication and then the Second World War. I mean, extraordinary, that the glue really that held the nation together in those very difficult years. But Jamie, what's so interesting, I think, about your story in particular is that she became incredibly fond of you. I mean, I understand she hosted your honeymoon at the Castle of May. Did did it become, because an equerry originally, right? Does it come from the French for horse, I think? I mean, you were like the guy who looked after the horses. And obviously in our age, an equerry has come to mean a sort of almost like a Batman, isn't it? Or a sort of jack of all trades who kind of looks after all the requirements. But you seem to have crossed over, and as we'll talk about later, I mean, you were actually, I believe you're Prince George's godfather. That was announced at the time. And did that process of crossing over and becoming a friend, or also being a friend, did that begin with the Queen Mother, or was she quite divided? After your 2 years, you went back to the army and that was it?
Well, as I say, that you were a member of her household, which is a very sort of technical and slightly rather archaic uh, meaning, which is that you were part of her sort of in a group, albeit a very young one. So hence the reason you had lunch with her and this sort of thing. So in a way, that's how she was able to sort of kind of treat you like a sort of surrogate grandson. And so I suppose it was a sort of natural consequence that she was very sweet, because actually when you I went to her just after having completed a tour in Northern Ireland at the height of the Troubles. And she had this thing that she would get furious with the private secretary if she felt he was overworking you, because she would always say, "Come on, no, he's on leave. He's with us for 2 years. We must give him a break from his travails," which was so far from the truth. It was just lovely being there. But she did have this wonderful habit of adopting, of actually perpetuating her contact with equerries once they had gone, so that you would usually get an invitation to go and stay with her in the Castle of May. I wasn't able to do it for many years because of my military service that followed my time with the Queen Mother. But I came back on leave from the SAS. I went to London, and I was invited to lunch, and I told her about getting engaged to my wife, and she said, "Well, you must come to the Castle of May for your honeymoon." And I just thought, it's incredibly kind, but my 24-year-old wife will just die. She was so nervous and all the rest of it. And I sort of said, "Well, ma'am, I've got this lovely holiday lined up," and she said, "Well, you must come for the last 4 or 5 days or whatever." So we went, and actually, Susie, who's pretty redoubtable herself, my wife, when we arrived at the Castle of May, there was this little figure, as was her wont, in a sort of a light blue raincoat, surrounded by corgis, walking across the lawn in front of the castle. And she came up and gave us a lovely welcome, sort of lots of smiles and things. And she said, "Could I just have a quick word with Susie?" And they wandered off into the middle of and I could see them chatting away. And when we got into the into the castle and we were on our own, I said, "What did she say?" And she said, "Well, all she said was, I know how you're feeling, and you don't have to see me for the rest of the week if you don't want to. This is your honeymoon, so you can get up when you want. You can do whatever you want." And as a result, see your daughter and joined in full pelt. She was that was very sort of very instructive of how she actually was. She was a very, very considerate person.
People sometimes say the Princess of Wales Catherine has something of the Queen Mother about her, the kind of unflappability, the kind of soft power. Obviously, the historical parallel in the role of, supporting, well, the future monarch, but, that kind of role. And perhaps also not coming from, I know, obviously, look, I know, as you said, Glamis Castle, which Jamie referred to earlier, is the Bowes Lion home in Scotland. I mean, it is an extraordinary place. I actually remember going there when I was a kid, and it's unbelievable. It's not grand, but in a way, like the Queen Mother, when she married the Duke of York, as he was then, I mean, she never was expected to become Queen. And although the Princess of Wales, obviously Catherine, came from a kind of very middle class background, they both in some way were able to slightly, I feel like they both had this ability to take the kind of nonsense of the royal thing and take it or leave it a bit, or not the nonsense, but to understand it and respect it, but to sort of hang on to a bit of common sense at the end of the day as well. Would that be fair, or am I over exaggerating?
No, I think that's actually very astute. It's a good observation. I mean, they are both they're both steadying people, steadying influences, and both strong. And my goodness, the Princess of Wales has been through it, and it was extraordinary and wonderful to see her doing the three peaks, all three peaks, the highest mountains in I think it's England, Scotland, and Wales, the other day. And she's made of the same stuff. Actually, she's great. I think she's a sort of. I always say this, but I think if the Prince of Wales had scoured the kingdom, sort of north, south, east, west, he wouldn't have found anybody better. I mean, she's a remarkable person. I'm very confident about the future with those two.
Absolutely. Jamie Lowther-Pinkerton joining the Royalist. Very excited to have him here. He's written a fantastic new book, The Edge of Light. And Jamie, of course, for many years was equerry. For 2 years was an equerry to the Queen Mother, and then came back in 2005 to become private secretary to Prince William 22 and Prince Harry 20. Ultimately, you actually managed the royal wedding of William and Catherine, I believe, Jamie. A fine military operation, if ever there was one. What was that job like?
Well, I mean, the royal wedding bit first. I mean, obviously I was promulgating the direction of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. Actually, they weren't that until the wedding day, but of William and Catherine, to the letter. So it was very much their day, and I was trying to help make it happen. My job was to when Prince William did say, you've got to take the reins of this, but the reins were pretty light, I have to say, because you had these past masters in every quarter doing what they did best. So the police, who were used to doing this sort of thing, the marvelous sort of media village people, the Abbey itself, and the royal household, i.e. the Lord Chamberlain's office, which does all of the administration and welcoming foreign guests and that sort of thing. So I think my role was pretty light rein, actually. I used to have a coordinating meeting, I think, every 2 weeks to begin with, and then it got to a week as we got nearer. But it was really literally in the sort of old cliche of saying boots fitting, mail getting through, how you're getting on, and promulgating perhaps some broad direction, but very much taking a leaf straight out of my SAS days, letting the experts get on with it.
Jamie, I know, as I said at the beginning, you are the absolute soul of discretion. That's why you've had these jobs you've had, and that's why you are a friend. You have moved to become a friend of the royal family. And as I said, I'm not breaking any confidences because it was announced at the time that you are Prince George's godfather. And I'm not going to sit here and try and prise things out of you that you don't want to talk about. But it is notable that in Spare, Harry, was pretty scathing about most of the courtiers and, as palace syndrome and all that kind of stuff. But he really singled you out for what is really a love letter. I mean, you're really portrayed in that book as very calm, a man who doesn't deal in nonsense. I mean, given and not even given everything that he said about, forget what he said about other people. What did it mean for you to read that from him and realize actually that he did value what you did for him when he was a young man?
I mean, I think it's sort of, if I can just sort of wind it back a bit. I mean, when I worked for them, very soon after starting work with them, I realized that they were both great guys, and I really loved them, actually. I mean, they were really, really fun to be with. They were 20 years younger than me, and I always said I was the only private secretary who needed to be able to ride a trial bike to keep up with them on their motorbikes. They're very good motorcyclists, I have to say. I never really did keep up with them, but I was very, very fond of them, and I still am, both of them, actually. Circumstances have come along which are very sad, but and they're not really for me to talk about because I left in 2014. But I'm fond of them both, and yes, sure, it was nice to read that in his book. I mean, the fact that he wrote the book is not for me. I don't really want to comment on that, if I may, Tom. But I'm fond of them. Is the bottom line, and I will remain so.
But yes and no, exactly. But does it mean a lot to you with both William and Harry that to have had influence on these two young men who, are very, very prominent in public life? And do you feel proud to have been a good influence on them?
Well, I feel very privileged that I did that job. I mean, I very nearly didn't, actually, because I'd just left the army, and a friend of mine got hold of me and said they're looking for somebody. Is there anybody leaving the SAS? It was I should have spotted it for a sort of patsy, but is there anybody leaving the SAS who could come in and be their first private secretary? And as far as I was concerned, that had gone. That was something which I'd done 20 years before, and I'd moved back into my military career and that sort of thing. But actually, funny enough, it was the same person who I based Conrad on, that friend I told you about, who I always used to go, and I still do, go and talk to him before I talk to anybody else. And he said, hang on a minute, Pinky, this could be really, really good fun apart from anything else. And of course, he was right, and I loved it. I think the point of working for them when I did is that it was in their 20s, and I would have been no good at the sort of private secretary role that demanded, absolute focus on red boxes and going in every morning. But I therefore saw it, I mean, in a way, trying to position to see the job through their eyes, which is the last thing they wanted, was a retired army officer telling them how to live their lives. So I think one of my principal objectives was really to sort of be able to allow them or enable them, with others' help, to get to a position where at the end of their 20s they could say, as my Irish father would have said, we have known the days and we've got it right. They both wanted to be soldiers. They both wanted to serve their country, and both of them in different ways went on operations and have got that sort of feeling of being there and done it. William, obviously, with the search and rescue force, and Prince Harry with the attack helicopter force in Afghanistan. So that for me was the most important thing. Obviously, we dipped our toes into all of the other stuff, the sort of overseas tours and the sort of charitable side, which they were very, very knowledgeable about, much more knowledgeable than I would ever be about it, because they'd lived it all their lives. So that was the sort of emphasis for me, was to make sure that their 20s they were able to hit the goals that they wanted to.
And Jamie's being typically modest there, because he did actually mastermind really the whole of Harry's trip to, along with the Ministry of Defence, Harry's trip to 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan. So we skip forward to the coronation, 2023, and you are put in charge of your godson, Prince George, and all the other pages. It must have been a heck of a week.
Yeah, it was really good fun, actually. I mean, I certainly didn't see that one coming. I mean, I was sitting in Suffolk, scratching away at my book, actually, and I got sort of hauled out of the deep freeze to go and look after the pages of I think there were about 8 or 10 of them, and they were real fun. I mean, they were of that age where they were sort of, really polite, but they were scallywags and they wanted to have fun at the same time. And we had a lot of fun together, actually, when we weren't doing the sort of rehearsals for the coronation. We went to the Imperial War Museum. We played I set up a sort of slip cordon and we played catch with cricket balls and things. And it was great fun. And, I'd quite recently had a son of that age myself. So I enjoyed it, actually. I was living vicariously through them back to my youth. And they did a great job. They were really, really good on the day.
Yeah. And George, of course, his parents have announced that he's off to Eton College in September. What do you think that Eton can give him in terms of, like, can it give him a glimpse of a normal life? Like, is it, like it gave his father and his uncle? Do you think it will give him that very valuable opportunity to, obviously, it's not normal, but with amongst his peers, he'll be able to go about school and have a pretty normal life compared to other kids at that school, right?
Well, I mean, you remember this. I mean, particularly it was the same in our day, that there was a lot of outside commentary about what it was like at Eton, and quite a lot of it sort of misunderstanding that what you're talking about there is a whole bunch of teenage boys. And, you've got your friendship groups, all that sort of stuff. And one of the things about Eton is it just simply doesn't take into account, who is the son of a duke or who is, like me, from a rabbit hole in East Suffolk. It was very egalitarian within the school itself. So it didn't really permit, and we all know, we've all got friends who are either, but they probably would have been sort of hoity-toity or whatever, wherever they had been. But at the same time, it didn't really permit that sort of, I suppose, sort of conceitedness. It was a good leveling place. So, and a place where you can really make long-lasting friendships. I mean, if you go through life, you've got to accrue these friendships, which I think is it's a good start to be. It's a good place to start at Eton, I'm sure, or wherever you go to school, as long as you enjoy it.
Definitely. Jamie Lowther-Pinkerton, the author of the new book, Beyond the Edge of Light, not a very atypical royal courtier for very many years, a guiding influence on William and Harry, and a guiding influence now on the next generation of the monarchy, the future, we must assume, King George VII. An extraordinary story. We're so privileged to have you here. May I ask you one last question before you go? From everything you've seen across the last 40 years, is the monarchy going to be all right?
My view on that one is that the monarchy, throughout its 1,200-year history, has always been on the edge of crisis. But it's a brilliant organism, really, for change. It's a chameleon, if you like. And I think it's probably the most successful corporate, if I can use that in very, very strong parentheses, organization in existence for having done that. I mean, obviously there were incentives in the past. You get your head cut off if you didn't. That doesn't exist anymore. But it's a sort of, it's a really clever organization which sort of takes the pulse of what's required of it in every age. And I have no I have no doubt, my words, but I've got no doubt that it remains able to do that, actually.
Jamie Lowther-Pinkerton, thank you so much for joining us on The Royalist.
Thanks, Dom.
Well, guys, thank you so much for spending some of your valuable time with us at The Royalist. I thought that was an absolutely brilliant episode. And I have to say, it's come on the back of a week of spectacular lives. So I hope you've been joining those lives as well. Thank you so much to our star guest, Jamie Lowther-Pinkerton. Do make sure you pick up a copy of his book, Beyond the Edge of Light. It's a great read. Thank you very much to Paula Froelich joining us from her day job at News Nation. And a huge thank you, of course, to our producer, Rachel. Rachel, thanks a million. But of course, the biggest thanks goes to all of you, and especially to Alexandra doing the door for us day in, day out. Thank you, Alexandra. And to all the incredible members of this community who have made it what it is. I've just been so blown away and gratified by the response we've had all week to all the lives that we've been doing all week to try and keep you up to date with this unbelievable week of royal news. I hope you appreciated the slight change of pace in today's podcast, and thank you very much for being with us. And all that remains for me to say is God save the King.